caught the rays of the sun. I had a bloom in the band of my spotless black Stetson, a long velvet gown, and 2 matching 6 guns. Sometimes I wore fringe on my bright beaded buckskins, raised hell with my pistols, and I smoked a cigar. I had a rattlesnake necklace and I loved desperados, a petticoat wildcat on the outlaw Belle Starr. Worn my rebel shirt in southwest Missouri, spoke Greek and Latin and Hebrew quite well. I was fierce as a wildcat, deadly aim with a pistol. I played the piano like a sweet southern belle. My brother rode under the black flag in Kansas. He was killed with Quantrill in the Great Civil War. I was only 16 when I bought twin revolvers, began my career as the outlaw Belle Starr.
Hi, I'm Donna Stiles Hood.
I'm Dr. Ron Hood. Welcome to Younger's Bend. This is our cabin that we had brought from Missouri, built originally in 1850. It is not the original cabin to the property that was lost long ago. Younger's Bend here consists of 55 acres on the Canadian River. It was the original home site for Sam and Belle Starr. This cabin was built in California, Missouri, and is 4 rooms, built of native hardwoods consisting of oak, hickory, and black walnut. It was moved log for log and is reassembled on site here. And they used hand adze and foot adze and broad axe and the blade cuts are still in the timbers here. The chinking was built with an original formula from the U.S. Park Service, so it's original to the time frame as well. The site you see now is what it looked like 3 years ago. It was really tall brush. The grave had collapsed. The headstone was laying on the ground. Even occasional visitors wouldn't venture because the brush was too thick and it was difficult to find. But revealing all that, as we moved the brush away, we found the original pile of chimney stones that were brought down from the top of the mountain, found some of the foundation stones, and found the hand-dug well, 26 feet deep, dry laid stone. It's different than what was pictured in the books that talked about a babbling brook. Well, there's really not. It's a dry well. And they talked about it being perched on a sort of a rocky ledge. There's not a rock on the place that wasn't brought down from the top of the mountain. We're standing in alluvial sand from the Canadian River. The original cabin stood right behind me when Belle was interred. She was basically buried in the front yard of the cabin. The one artifact that remained was a large iron frame bed, which Claude Hamilton, the owner of the property in the late 30s, welded together, and that gate served as the marker of how to get to the grave. That gate has never rusted out, and we took that apart and actually put that in the cabin and back in the function of a bed frame again. This is the original frame, bed frame. Whether it belonged to Belle or someone after her, no one will ever know. The hinges were made out of wagon springs and are brazed on. And the surprising part here, the humidity and everything, this gate has survived now, at least outdoors since the 1930s, and has never rusted through. So we find occasional bits of pottery, but the place has just been excavated so many years. Even Mr. Hamilton felt the lure of gold and has searched his entire life here with nothing. So we still have occasions of people who want to come in and metal detect, and we don't allow any survey or salvage or anything like that here. Following Belle's death and on the other side of the river near Hoyt, her body was cared for by the local residents there. Her body was prepared. And then the next day, February 4th, 1889, Belle's body was transported on the back of a wagon across the ferry and then up onto the trail and then buried here. She laid buried here for 1 year, and then unfortunately she was buried with her 2 babies, her 2 pistols, as she called her babies, one in her hand and one by her side. And that was a very well-known phrase at the time. In 1890, her grave was robbed and the pistols were looted. Her daughter Pearl, who lived in Fort Smith at the time, had the stone monument erected at that point. The original headstone was chipped away by souvenir hunters. This facsimile has been here since the early 1940s, and it represents the original headstone in good detail. Belle was very flamboyant. She was the movie star of her day. She sought attention. She had played the piano in the lobby of her father's hotel in Carthage. She dressed very extravagantly for the Indian nations here. She bought her dresses at the Boston store in Fort Smith. She wore a velvet riding dress, rode a side saddle, which in the Indian Territory became known as a Belle Starr. She wore an ostrich plume in her hat, and she wore 2 large 6-shooters. Big horse pistols, Smith & Wesson Schofields, strapped to her side. Belle was a very educated woman for the time here in the Indian nations. After the Civil War, she came from a cultured society. She was educated. She spoke Latin. She played classical piano. She established one of the first schools and some of the churches. She was very civic-minded in helping her neighbors. But I think the most outstanding thing was that she became the subject of dime novels. There was a publisher in St. Louis that popularized Jesse James in much the same way. They were sort of an anti-hero that sort of engendered the weaker sex, but also that southern genteel, coupled with the fact that she was an outlaw, hanging out with notable cutthroats and bad men. It is February 3rd, 2014, 125 years to the day and almost the minute Belle Starr was assassinated here on the banks of the Canadian River. Belle was riding home. She had stopped in Hoyt, had a little bit of a piece of cornbread, something to eat, and was trying to get back home before nightfall. She rounded a small curve here and basically took a shot to the back. Unsuspected. A shotgun blast was fatal. She was not killed instantly. She laid in a trail for a while. She was found by Frog Hoyt. The ferry ran just in this direction, and the Hoyt Lane ran at a diagonal here along the shale where they had better footing. Basically, Frog Hoyt was the first person to find her. Her horse bolted across the river and ran on to Younger's Bend, where Pearl saw the riderless horse and knew something was afoul. Pearl came down. They said that Belle was still alive by Pearl's testimony, but never spoke after her shot. We're in the fields where Edgar Watson farmed, just adjacent to the bottom here. And Edgar Watson wore a size 7 shoe, and that was the size that they saw. The trail actually moved away toward his home. So Edgar Watson was probably the most likely culprit for a number of reasons. This was the last point that Belle made on that trip back from Fort Smith. So this is the final point of a 3-year journey, restoring Younger's Bend, restoring her grave, and now celebrating the 125th anniversary here in the bottoms of the Canadian River.
But she lived in the shadow of her mind.